Penn State's win total is pretty high. It's set at 10.5. So that means you should take the under, right?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, and right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit the FanDuel app or FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us a part of your regular routine. Become an everydayer, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. And let me know your thoughts down in the comment section as we are making a prediction for Penn State's win total here. Our friends over at FanDuel have this one at 10.5. Is it too high? Does that mean that there's a case to take the under here? And we're going to go over Penn State's schedule and why that line is set at 10.5 for a reason. And the case for Penn State being better than Ohio State this season, is it finally the year that the Nittany Lions not only win that game, but surpass Ohio State? I think so, but I'm also not the only one that believes that. So just for that's not just a homer take. There are other people that do genuinely believe that. Let's start with this win total here, unpack it at 10.5 wins. That's a lot. That is a high win total. There is a reason for that, and it's because Penn State is going to be favored in at the very least, 11 of these games. I mean, you start out with, yes, the cupcake portion of the schedule, Nevada, FIU, Villanova, and then you get to that obstacle. You get to Oregon. You're at home, you're at Beaver Stadium, but Oregon defeated you a year ago. They do have a bunch of changes that are going to be to the roster, but there's a bunch of continuity as far as the coaching staff goes, and that's important. That's important if you're Oregon. Then the rest, Penn State's better than UCLA. And I'm going to go in order here. Penn State's better than Northwestern, Iowa. You get to Ohio State. So at Indiana, Michigan State, Nebraska, Rutgers. So it's really those two games that Penn State needs to be worried about here. And in the process, I'm going to make the case for, I'll talk about Ohio State specifically, but starting with Penn State, the reason they're going to be favored in all of these games is because of Drew Allar, having Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen back, most of the starting offensive line except for the right guard, and then bringing in Jim Knowles, coupling him with Andy Kotelnicki to form arguably the best duo. If you want the Penn State bias take, that is the best duo in all of college football. But that dynamic duo between Knowles and Kotelnicki, conservatively, if you really want to be hard on Knowles and Kotelnicki, top five at a minimum, I think most people would probably put that around top 3. So that's what Penn State has to offer this season. So that 10.5 win total, if you assume that Penn State can't win either of the big games, the rest of them, that's par for the course. Penn State should beat, yes, the Nevadas, the FIUs, the Villanovas, no issue. Okay, if you want to make that comment, and if you want to joke about it, that's fine. But Penn State's going to be a double-digit favorite against UCLA. Northwestern, all things standing, of course. If these two teams relatively match up with what they have on paper in the preseason, we can't predict injuries. We can't predict what is going to happen throughout the season at that point in time. Okay, and I don't want to jinx anything, but it is a realistic possibility. But if you set all the lines for these games right now, here in the middle of July, Penn State is a double-digit favorite against everybody else, except for Oregon, where they are still favored, and against Ohio State, where they're going to be an underdog for now. But I think as the season progresses, that line's going to shrink a little bit. So there is a case, if you're taking all things considered on paper, things could change. Circumstances could change. The situation could change. You don't know who's going to be available and who's not. But Penn State is right now, according to the books, better than 11 of these teams on paper, giving them 11 wins over that 10.5. And that is such a finite margin. If you want to, let's just, for the sake of it, devil's advocate because I will take the over. I will take the over in this situation because I do think Penn State is better than Oregon, and I think they win that game and they get them in an ideal spot. I'm not concerned about the Oregon game as much as maybe other people would be. Is Oregon a good team? Are they going to be well coached? Are they going to be well prepared? Absolutely. So is Penn State. I think Penn State's in a better situation in that fourth game of the season for the Nittany Lions than where Oregon would be. That's not a team I want to play if I'm anybody later in the season, because then Dante Moore will settle in. The offense will begin to gel and build some chemistry. That's kind of the case with Ohio State there later in the season. So that's the only game that I really circle there. But if you think that everything, the house of cards could crash, this is the devil's advocate case for Penn State's win total. If you think that Penn State is, that James Franklin just absolutely cannot win the big game, there's individual circumstances to all of that. It's not just about the big game. It's how do those teams match up? Okay? Penn State has won big games in the past, not enough. I'm not here to justify and make all those excuses, but if you take them on an individual case-by-case basis, I think the goalposts are being moved for some of those big games, but other times, yeah, Penn State just falls short in the moment. And it's because they're not the better team. They're not favored in those games. They haven't typically been favored in those games. Aside from Notre Dame being that was a neutral toss-up, Penn State hasn't lost a game that they were favored in a very long time. So they win the games that they're expected to. But at some point, you do have to break through that glass ceiling, if you will. So the devil's advocate situation here, you think that Penn State can't win the big game, that they just get, that James Franklin just gets intimidated, that it doesn't matter that Andy Kotelnicki and they get Jim Knowles, the best defensive coordinator in all of college football. They pair those two together. This staff is elite. The staff is elite. They can win they are poised to, there's really no excuse here. There's no situational, now circumstances aside, what's on paper right now, there's really no excuse for Penn State to not at a minimum go 11-1. Because I think the worst case scenario for this team is that they split Oregon or Ohio State. They either lose to Oregon and they beat Ohio State, or they beat Ohio State, or they lose to Ohio State and they do beat Oregon. The more likely option is that they beat Oregon at home. That's obvious there, right? But 2 losses against Oregon and Ohio State, those are the 2 big games on this schedule. And then that goes under the 10.5 win total. But you're assuming that it's simply because, oh, James Franklin's not a great game day head coach. That's really the only justification that you have. Drew Allar is a good college football quarterback, and I do believe that he takes another step forward. Second year in Andy Kotelnicki's offense. You have not 1 but 2 superstar running backs. You have the offensive line that is built for a deep postseason run. You have the defense that is going to be top 10 again. This is a formula to win double-digit games, and that is why the line is set at 10.5. So if you think this team goes 10-2, loses to Oregon and Ohio State, okay, I can understand that. But if you're just saying, well, it's because Penn State can't win the big game, then you are going to be very surprised when Penn State beats Oregon. That is I'm comfortable making that prediction right now with all things considered, with what we know presently. That Ohio State game, that's a bit of a toss-up. It's in Columbus. I think Julian Sayin and that offense will progressively get better and get better and get better and just continue to be challenging. It helps that they have Jeremiah Smith, right? Really helps that they have Jeremiah Smith. But they have a lot of changes. So 11-1, that's over 10.5. Obviously, if they go undefeated, that's over that 10.5 as well. Penn State, these are all, even if Penn State does have some bumps and bruises, as long as most of the core stays intact, no quarterback injuries, both running backs go out. Like I said, I don't like speaking these into existence, but Penn State, its core is good enough to go into Kinnick Stadium and win that game, to be able to overcome a challenging Indiana team, a challenging Nebraska team late in the season. I don't think Michigan State, UCLA, Northwestern, Rutgers, those Big Ten teams, you would really need to get Penn State in a bad spot and one of those teams on an absolute hot streak for anything crazy to happen. That Cinderella type of game, I don't foresee any of that, but that's where those teams are. So, and that's how I would group them. So take over 10.5, but let me know your thoughts down in the comments section if there's a better case for why Penn State would go under this win total. Now let's talk about the schedule a little more, as I alluded to it. Grouping some of these games, Ohio State and Oregon are the big fish, but Nebraska, Indiana, if you think Penn State is going to fall well below expectations, those are the games that you want to keep an eye on. And I'll explain why coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. Now, are you new to FanDuel? Well, new customers can bet just $5, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. All you got to do is go over to the FanDuel app or FanDuel.com to get started. And you can bet on all those sports that I mentioned: baseball, golf, soccer, WNBA, Penn State football. Yes, well, we're talking about win totals in this episode, but in addition to win totals, also game lines that are available on FanDuel as well. So if you think Penn State's going to go over or under 10.5 wins, you can make that wager. And if you are a new customer over at FanDuel, you can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And those bets can be used on any of these that I've mentioned. All you got to do is open up the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Penn State's schedule is easy. Well, no, it's not. Penn State's just really, really good. And at least, again, all things considered right now with what we know, on paper, they are very good. Circumstances change, but the way that this schedule breaks for Penn State, you get Oregon really early in the season. Again, it's favorable. I'm not going to say that it's easy. This is an absolute, you get to walk through everywhere because Kinnick Stadium at Iowa is still going to pose a challenge. You're on the road back-to-back against Iowa and Ohio State. Now, granted, you do get a bye week before that Ohio State game. I think that does help. But Indiana late in the season, even Michigan State deserves at least some credence, if you will, at least more respect than I think the general public will give them. Nebraska late in the season, that's a team that could be peaking at the right time. I've seen people that are saying they could go undefeated. They could be undefeated at that point in time. By the time they match up with Penn State, Nebraska could be undefeated going into Beaver Stadium. Matt Rule, former Penn State football player, that's going to be a game that I have circled. So this is just kind of a general overview. Ohio State's going to be the toughest matchup. It's in Columbus. That's one of the most talented teams in the country. I think chemistry, gelling together, is Julian Sayin. This team only goes as far as Julian Sayin, and the defense, right? The defense is going to have a complete makeover here with no Jim Knowles because Penn State got him away. How do they respond under Matt Patricia? Caleb Downs leading the way, but is that team all right? I'm getting into my final segment already about Ohio. So that's a teaser for my thoughts on Penn State and Ohio State specifically, and why I'm not the only one that says that Penn State might be better suited for this season than Ohio State. But you get Oregon early in the season. You get them at home. That's the whiteout game. Dante Moore, this offense, despite, again, Moore going into his second season with Oregon and Dan Lanning, building that rapport, you still got to be on the same page with your weapons. And when they lose a player like Evan Stewart, you know, it's all those smaller little advantages that kind of build up over time. So new starting quarterback, new offensive line. Yeah, you have the same coaching staff there, but you still got to be able to build all of that. And that's going to take time. Oregon's a second half team. So if they can kind of get through that first part of the season unscathed outside of Penn State, you know, Oregon's a team that in the playoffs could be peaking at the right time. I view Oregon as a strong playoff team in due time. But UCLA, again, they just don't have the entirety of the team. Maybe that trip for Penn State after Oregon, situationally, that's not ideal. That's not ideal for Penn State. I don't think UCLA is good enough, but let's look at the way that sets up. You go from playing against Oregon in the whiteout game to flying all the way across the country, no bye week, to play a UCLA team that you are definitely not going to have as much juice for. You're definitely not. For the Bruins, is Nico Iamaleava really going to be that enough of a motivational factor for Penn State? No. Penn State's significantly better than Northwestern, obviously going on the road to Kinnick against Iowa. If that game's at night, spooky things at Kinnick Stadium, spooky things at night at Kinnick Stadium happen. We've seen that before. Some of the best Penn State teams go there, and sometimes they don't always emerge victorious there, right? But we'll see what this Iowa team is ultimately made of, because they're going to have significant changes on offense. Is Mark Gronowski really going to will them to that many victories? But it's at Kinnick, so I'm always going to offer that factor. So if I'm grouping these games, Ohio State and Oregon are in that tier 1 for Penn State. Tier 2, I would say, I will give a lot of respect to Nebraska. Dylan Raiola in year 2, Matt Rule. Okay, down the stretch, Nebraska is always going to be a defensive-minded type of team. And based on the way their schedule lines up, I mean, that's a truly best-case scenario. If Nebraska comes into Beaver Stadium with 1 or 2 losses, that would not surprise me at all. If that's a team that is 8-2 or even 9-1, I think undefeated is definitely a stretch. And forgive me because I don't know Nebraska's schedule off the top of my head. But if Nebraska's a 1 or 2 loss team going up against Penn State, they're ranked in the top 20, top 15, would not shock me at all for the Cornhuskers. That's the kind of the top team in that tier 2 going up again in Penn State's schedule. Because I want to look at the other teams. Okay, after Ohio State and Oregon, where could Penn State trip up? If this is a doomsday scenario for Penn State, 9-3, 8-4, I don't see it. I really don't see it unless this team gets ravaged by injuries. Nebraska is at the top of that tier 2. Now it's at Beaver Stadium, which certainly helps. Same thing goes for Indiana. Indiana is a team that I think will be better down the stretch. Now, I do expect them to have 3 or 4 losses coming into Beaver Stadium, though. But Curt Cignetti is an excellent X's and O's coach, game day coach. People are going to say otherwise because of the first round of the playoff game against Notre Dame. Notre Dame was just a really tough team. They matched up very well with them, okay? That doesn't mean that Cignetti is this awful game day head coach. No, Indiana just had no answer for an extremely talented Notre Dame team that just matched up with them so well. With that being said, I am not going to overlook an Indiana team that might come in with 3 or 4 losses because they're scheduled, but that's another team like Oregon, where new starting quarterback for Fernando Mendoza, you give him a supporting cast that he was winning games at Cal. That's a team that I'm not just going to immediately look past there. So they're kind of, it helps that Penn State has that game at home in Beaver Stadium. So Indiana, that's still a very winnable game for the Nittany Lions, but Indiana, do not look past them because, again, they will get better as the season goes along. Against Iowa, again, that's tier 2. I think tier 2 can stop there. I'd put UCLA and Iowa in a similar category of tier 3 because it's the daunting road trip. Iowa is before Ohio State, so that's a look-ahead spot for the Nittany Lions potentially. It's Kinnick. I know that the coaching staff is going to understand the situation, the ramifications there. But do the current players understand the nature of what Kinnick Stadium, Iowa City have to offer? That is a hostile environment when it comes to college football. And one of the, I hopefully in the Big Ten Conference, I think it gets its due respect. Nationally, though, I wonder if it gets enough, because I think that is one of the better stadium environments. I'd argue that it's in the top 10, really, nationally, for how rowdy it can get, especially if the Hawkeyes are good. If they're not as good, okay, well, but when they're a dark horse in the Big Ten race, Iowa, Kinnick Stadium, one of the best environments in all of college football. UCLA, same situation where I think they will be better this season. I think Deshaun Foster is settling in, but it's more about the road trip. It's more about the 6-hour plane ride to Los Angeles, no bye week in between. On the heels of that game against Oregon, how are you going to match that intensity? You could easily come out flat if you're Penn State, but is UCLA good enough to be able to kind of hold on to that momentum and win that game and secure a victory. I think it'll be closer than more people will expect, but I'm not expecting a Penn State loss. Northwestern, Michigan State, Rutgers. Now, I think Michigan State's at the top of that next group, of that tier 4, if you will. And that one's on the road in East Lansing, because I think Childs, the quarterback, I think Jonathan Smith, again, will only continue to build a rapport. You would rather play Michigan State earlier in the season as opposed to later in the season, but nothing too daunting for Penn State to handle. And of course, do I really need to go through it? Nevada, FIU, Villanova. Do I really need to break down the analysis there of why Penn State should be expected to win those games? I would hope not. I would hope not. But as the games approach, right, we will talk about that accordingly. So, all right, so let me get to specifically the Buckeyes, because I started to generally talk about them, but what makes Penn State the better team? Because the Buckeyes are defending national title champions. They still have Jeremiah Smith. He's a Heisman contender. Well, we're going to compare and contrast and talk about how I'm not the only one that thinks Penn State is better than this Ohio State team. It's close, but the Nittany Lions have the advantage. We'll talk about it next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Let me start with the fact that I am not the only one that thinks Penn State is better than Ohio State. Not significantly. I don't expect Penn State to be this touchdown 10-point favorite against the Buckeyes on the road. It's going to be close, but I think Penn State does get a win. If everything, all things considered, I think Penn State can win that game finally after a decade, because they are the better team. Spencer McLaughlin, who covers the Oregon Ducks and thinks Penn State's going to beat his Oregon Ducks, who he covers, but he's also the host of Locked On College Football, put out his Big Ten power rankings. He has Penn State, and he's confident about it. He's not, I'm not so sure, it could be Ohio State, and I went with Penn State. No, he confidently, definitively says Penn State is better than Ohio State. Now, let's go over the reasons for that. One, Drew Allar versus Julian Sayin. Buckeye fans are going to say, well, Sayin has more potential, but okay, that might be the case. You might think that Sayin has a higher ceiling, and he very well could, but we're talking about right now. First, you're starting with the Buckeyes versus somebody that has been through a lot of college football, 4 years. Okay, well, we saw what Drew Allar, okay, players can still get better. Drew Allar's still going to get better. You want to talk about consistency and continuity, Drew Allar finally has that. Second year of Andy Kotelnicki. Okay. That is a big deal. You're also, let's talk about the coordinators. It's not even just about the QB battle. Okay. Who's better? Because quarterback is the most important position. The coordinators, though, can make or break a player, really. You're going from Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles were the best coordinator duo in all of college football. That was easy to say. You don't have either of them. You don't have that seasoned play caller anymore. I mean, Chip Kelly, for the ups and downs, the roller coaster that he has had in his football career for the NFL, but when it comes to college football, and even, when he was at UCLA, did not have the track record, but when he settled back into an offensive coordinator role, man, was that great for Chip Kelly and great for Ohio State. You don't have that anymore. You have a first-time offensive coordinator in Brian Hartline, and they wouldn't promote him if they didn't think he was ready. But is he going to give you the same kind of capabilities that to process, to view, to know the blueprint week in, week out, the same way that Chip Kelly did? No. Brian Hartline is going to have growing pains. Matt Patricia comes in. The same thing. Patricia, kind of like Chip Kelly, has had these ups and downs, a good defensive coordinator with the Patriots, and then kind of lost any momentum, steam after he took over as a head coach with the Detroit Lions. I don't know what that did to him, because he never settled back in with the Philadelphia Eagles. Is it systematic? Is it the players that he was working with at the time and at the level? Maybe college is going to be good for him. I'm not going to, for the sake of, jokes, and you could absolutely rag on Matt Patricia and say that Ohio State's defense is going to be below average or terrible. No, Ohio State is still going to have tons of talent, but it's about finding the right mesh to balance all of it, because there is significant turnover. I fully expect Ohio State to score a lot of points throughout the season. You and I could be the starting quarterback for Ohio State. with Jeremiah Smith. You bring in Max Clare, who might end up being the best tight end in college football this year. Brian Hartline's job is almost is easier to an extent because of what he has. Same with Julian Sayin. You can settle in when you have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, and Max Clare. Who do you cover? Who do you double? You double Jeremiah Smith. Everybody's running wide open. Good luck. Okay. For teams, but Penn State is more poised to handle that. So it's all those changes. Here are my question marks about this Ohio State team. Genuinely. How does Julian Sayin do as a starter? How does Brian Hartline do as an offensive coordinator? How does Matt Patricia do settling in as a college DC and losing almost every single starter on this defense other than Downs and Igbenison? And maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe there's a third starter in there. The talent's still there. But is Patricia going to be able to offset those changes? Or is it just going to be back and forth, a battle, a shootout every single time Ohio State takes the football field? How does Ryan Day adjust without a star tandem, a bona fide star tandem? It's not that Brian Hartline and Matt Patricia can be good, but let's be honest. Who would Ohio State rather have? Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles or Brian Hartline and Matt Patricia? The answer across the board, 100 out of 100, is going to be Knowles and Chip Kelly. So now when you look at Penn State, I think, has the advantage at quarterback with Drew Allar over where Julian Sayin is presently. Long-term, 5 years from now, who knows? Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, those two running backs are better than what Ohio State has I think Peoples and Donaldson are going to be one of the best in the country. But I think Penn State has the advantage there. Offensive line. With what Penn State is returning, Ohio State is going to have to, they brought some players through the transfer portal. Ohio State's offensive line still going to be really good, but I think Penn State's is better. Penn State's coordinators are better. Defensively, now you have Jim Knowles. Okay? Caleb Downs is the best overall defender, of course. Igbenison's going to be up there too. He's going to be one of the best cornerbacks in the nation. Don't look past A.J. Harris for Penn State. As a comparable comparison, cornerback to cornerback, A.J. Harris is going to be one of the better cornerbacks in all of the Big Ten, maybe even in the nation as well. Deny Dennis Sutton for Penn State. Zane Durant on the defensive line. And then you get Jim Knowles. Oh, well, Jim Knowles' defense takes forever. It's going to take 2-3 years for Penn State to get adjusted. Penn State's been running a 4-2-5. Subtle nuances from Knowles' system to Penn State's. Okay. That might take some time to get adjusting to. But it's not that Penn State is going to go through, again, and he was inheriting a top 50 group at the time for Jim Knowles at Ohio State. Now you're inheriting a top 10 group. So Knowles doesn't have to do a complete rebuild or start over or anything. And he gets superstar caliber players with Sutton, Durant. Zach Wheatley, I think, belongs in that conversation as well. He was an all postseason player last year. So Dennis Sutton, Durant, Wheatley, Harris. You get breakout players with Zariah Fisher and Tony Rojas. The big differences, though, quarterback, running back, coordinators, and what Penn State just has in terms of consistency and continuity overall. Ohio State doesn't have that this season, and it's okay to go through somewhat. Penn State's going to go through this rebuild as well, this reload. That's going to set them backwards in 2026. They're going to lose all of this. Michigan did it, aside from the, sign stealing, cheating allegations, right? Michigan had the same thing with the continuity, the consistency, J.J. McCarthy, the running backs, the offensive line, and the defense. Ohio State had that last year, except Will Howard came in as that transfer veteran quarterback. Now Penn State has this. It is Penn State's turn to take the mantle, to take the torch at the top of the Big Ten and at the top of college football and be a perennial title contender here. I'm that confident in Penn State. So let the record show it, right? That's going to do it for this session. That is going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this episode. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us a part of your regular routine. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around all your favorite Penn State sports teams. We're going to have more coverage, again, more previews, more predictions around Penn State, what you need to know specifically about the offense and defense, breakout players, going through all of it as we're getting ready. We are so close to training camp, just a couple of weeks away. Wrestling coverage as well, basketball too. It is all going to be right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.